and record. A few minutes or a few seconds. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. My guest today has a very interesting biography, which I will read for you today. In 1730, the enigmatic Mr. Chicken was the last private residence of the now famous number 10 Downing Street, London, before graciously moving next door to accommodate the nation's line of prime ministers who would take residence there for the next 300 years. Nothing more is known about Mr. Chicken until today, when he's now a writer, screenwriter, director, and filmmaker who sometimes goes by the name M.A.Batten. After winning over 150 creative awards during a 25-year career in advertising, he decided to start telling stories that didn't involve brands or their ridiculous reasons to buy. He is now collecting awards for his screenplays and films, including Best Screenplay at TMFF, USA, 2 first place at New York City Midnight, USA, finalist at Page International Awards, UK, semi-finalist at the 39th Elche in Spain, and a list of official selections. His first short film, Hunt, starred Brian J. Brockman from X-Men and Unbreakable. His second short film, Missing, starred Lorene Dix, Black Mirror, and Bodyguard. And his award-winning feature film screenplay, Capture, was written by Rupert Grint, who many of you may not know was part of the Harry Potter series. His first fantasy novel, Dark and the Boy in the Hole, is completed and currently seeking representation, hint, hint. Meanwhile, he's concurrently editing his offbeat Star Wars fan film, producing his next short film, in pre-production of his upcoming podcast for screenwriters and actors, and developing a TV show. And when he's not doing all of these amazing things, his daughter either enjoys what he writes or, as he says, is a convincing liar. Joining us for the first time on the podcast, Mr. Chicken himself, or as he is known, M.A.Batten or Matt Batten. Thank you so much for joining us. I probably butchered your last name at the very end. Batten, not Batten.
Yes, thank you very, very much. Yes, M.A.Batten or Mr. Chicken. It's great to be here. Great to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Matt, tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, you have a very, very extensive career. So what made you decide to first go into advertising and then make the jump into screenwriting and now possibly getting your first book out there? Like, where does it begin?
So, look, like most writers, you loved writing at an early age, right? As a young kid. Same story here. It's the cliche. For me, though, I was also an artist. You mentioned the owl picture here. It's an oil painting that I've done. So as a painter and a drawer as well. And that just led me into a career in design, which led me into a career in advertising. I didn't pursue that didn't seek that out as a career, I should say. It just kind of happened. You wake up one day and you go, oh, I'm in advertising. That was a career for 25 years and still is. But as you're going through that career and you're going up through the ranks, and it's supposed to be a career that's very creative focused and come up with ideas and championing creativity and ingenuity and all that sort of stuff, you start to realize, certainly after you've been through it for a few decades, certainly in the last 10 years or so, you start to see that it treats creativity quite poorly. Clients aren't buying the super creative ideas, they're buying the safe stuff. And so as a creative, you have this yearning to actually do something else. And I know a couple of moments where I'd have, small gaps in my career, just pursue other creative endeavors. I pursued photography for a bit and won some awards in that. And then from that went into kind of filmmaking. My first film kind of wins some awards. And then I start doing screenwriting and then start getting recognized in that. And that's when I almost came full circle and went, I started out wanting to be a writer. I had all those things I was working on as a kid. I need to get back into that because I really enjoy it. It's in terms of the food chain of creativity, in terms of storytelling, it starts with the writer before it gets to somebody who's publishing a book or producing a film. It starts with the writer having that idea and fleshing it out on a page. And so, if anything, it was a cathartic way of getting away from all of the, and I'm Australian, so I'm going to swear occasionally, getting away from the bullshit of the advertising industry and being able to tap back into what it means to be a creative and go, no, this is a good idea. And I know it's a good idea. It's not just a gut feeling. It's because I know what works for this audience or for this need. And so, yeah, getting back into that and just loving it. It's challenging because I'm still balancing the advertising career.
Okay.
Until this takes off. Again, as you said, hint, hint, a lead agent, if you're out there, publishers. When this takes off, I'm out of advertising and I'm doing this full time because this is my love, this is my passion, and I know it's something I'm capable of doing.
Awesome. And actually, it is really true what you say for like advertising and marketing, because there's a lot of creative juices that go into it, but it's very, very, I would say, maybe you can agree to this, that it takes a lot of, I think it's more stressful for advertising, for creative writing, because you're trying to push a product that's not your own, but it's someone else's, as opposed to an author where you do have to kind of sell yourself, but that's easy because you know what you like. But if you're doing it for someone else, and as you said before, people go for the safe stuff because, they know that, as opposed to something that's not something new in case you're trying to write something new. I can't imagine the stress. So where would you say your aha moment that you said, you know what, I'm going to try going into screenwriting? Because that, I think, is really interesting, because you're actually probably the first guest I've actually had on this show that is a screenwriter. And I know next to nothing about screenplay and that whole venture, because that's a whole other set of writing. So tell me a little about that and how that aha moment came for you.
As I said, loved writing as a kid. I probably started writing what I thought would be my first novel at about the age of 13. It was a contemporary action thriller about the explosive tension between astronauts from different countries on the International Space Station when a nuclear war breaks out on Earth. Right? When the world goes to war, what are these different astronauts from different countries going to do when they're stuck inside this confined space? Right?
Okay.
They have to be friends to survive, or do they erupt into war as well? So that was my first concept, and I was writing that. Of course, I never finished it. I was 13 at the time.
Right.
I still love the concept, so maybe I'll revisit it one day, expand upon it. If anything, it sounds like the sort of idea that would make a good film.
Right.
And so that's where I find a lot of the interplay for me, right? So even in writing my debut manuscript, my novel, I write it with thinking in my mind, the marketability, the franchise of it. Can it translate easily to a screenplay? Because that's where publishers also want to be able to go, not just to sell a book that is going to make them money in terms of publishing.
That's
where
right.
else can they take it? The option rights, right? The world they can build out of this, the financial world, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
In my late teens, I started writing, and probably got about, a quarter of the way, a third of the way into, essentially it was a revisionist Arthurian novel. It was like the untold story of Lord Arthur. So I was heavily into all that sort of stuff, heavily into kind of fantasy and fantasy fiction, historical aspects of that, particularly King Arthur. And I'd read Le Morte d'Arthur almost in its entirety, had done a lot of research around that, and found characters where there were gaps in their history, or they just disappeared from the entire text. And I was using those to create a whole new parallel story that almost undoes Le Morte d'Arthur by the end. So I was writing that. That was quite research intensive. I was enjoying that process. I then moved from that to a more fantasy based thing. Obviously, again, as late teens, young guy, that was when life gets in the way, a career starts, all that sort of stuff. And again, it's not until later when you become dissatisfied with how creativity is treated in the industry that you delve back into the creative pursuits. And like I said, it became full circle. That became the aha moment where I found myself between two agency roles and had time on my hands, and I had done the photography and had done a short film, and then I thought, no, I want to write some more. Coming up with the idea for that short film was the most fun. Shooting it was great, but coming up with the idea for it was great. I want to write more like that. And so I started writing a few more things and entering a few competitions and getting recognized. And that was probably the aha moment of, this is what you were trying to do 25, 30 years ago. Do this. This is what you love doing. And, you know, you seem to have an ability for it, coupled with, obviously, the career in advertising to kind of think about, is this marketable? Is it sellable? Where can it go? You know, what might an audience want out of this? So, I mean, that was the real aha moment, I think, of trying to fulfill that creative need and almost stumbling back into that moment of, you used to do this and you did it through your career writing TV ads and stuff, but you can do this in a really creative way now without all those shackles.
Wow, that's actually really cool. And it actually kind of leads into the next question, which you actually probably briefly touched on, which is, you know, what has the general response been, like the overall feedback? And what was that like entering your first screenplay into a contest? And did you expect that you would see yourself now getting recognition for all of these different screenplays? I mean, did that idea of like, oh, the snowball effect is happening, did that ever cross your mind in the beginning?
It didn't cross my mind there'd be the snowball effect. It was yeah, the one that really was that won the most awards, and then I've now fleshed it out as a feature film screenplay. It was a short film screenplay. Was the one that I wrote with Rupert Grint in mind as the lead character. It's actually an animated short that crosses over a bit into the real world. And when that won, you know, a few awards, getting this recognition, I actually then started thinking, maybe I could actually make this thing. Maybe this could happen. I was living in London at the time, and I found a casting director and a producer, and I was finding animators, and we're all getting together, and we're just out of the love of the project going, we could do this. We could actually make this and do the short film as a proof of concept for a feature film. And if we can get a good talent assigned, like if we can get Rupert on board, then we're going to go somewhere with this. And look, you know, the casting agent reached out to Rupert, and we got a lovely letter back from Rupert where he loved the idea. He really wanted to be part of it, but he had other engagements. Right. That's when you see later on, you go, okay, because he's doing this film, right? It's all about timing, getting the stars aligned. We also reached out to Kunal Nayar from Big Bang Theory.
Ooh, okay.
He wrote the most lovely letter back, and this one wasn't from his agent. This is definitely from Kunal, where he would have loved to have been involved as well, but he was going back because he was in London at the time, on hiatus. And unfortunately, we reached out to him just a fraction too late because he was just 3 weeks out from going back to LA to do the next season of Big Bang Theory. So yeah, it was, you know, that sort of stuff makes you go, yeah, this is going somewhere. We can do this. So it's from that success and that excitement, if anything, that generates into the next thing. And then when it comes to writing the books, it's when you go, I have these ideas that aren't short films and they're bigger than a feature film, but at the same time, they could still be a feature film or a series of films or something. And my first novel, Dark and the Boy in the Hole, it's a standalone novel, but it could easily be, I shouldn't say easily, I already know what the second, third, and fourth novels will be in the series if it goes really well. But that, as well as while you're writing it, I'm writing each chapter almost though it's a scene in the film, so that you can kind of go, this is how it can easily translate to other media. How do you cross media it? If not a film, could it be episodic TV, that kind of thing on platform TV? The characters that I'm writing, the characters I'm creating, and world building, how are they merchandisable? Is there stuff where you could end up making stuff that kids want to buy and collect? And it's factoring all of that into it without it disrupting the story, getting in the way of the story. It's making sure you've got those things that are saleable. So that's kind of the process that I've been going through. And yes, I'm looking for a literary agent or a publisher for Dark and the Boy in the Hole.
Nice. And that actually from what you've told me, this is like, it's very, very fascinating, and it's kind of like a different mindset from, you know, a screenwriter and an author. And in your experience, how do you kind of like separate the two thought processes, in the sense, because for me, I've only known how to write books and short stories. I can't even imagine like the thought process of going into like screenplay writing. So for you and your experience, how do you kind of like have like a different mindset or a different approach to, from writing your debut novel to writing one of your screenplays? It's like in the structure, the word choice. Tell me about that process.
There's definitely differences in structure, because a screenplay, it's got to find, you know, it has to be 90 pages long. It can't be any longer. You can't be any shorter. You don't pad in pages to try and stretch it out, because then you've got boring sections of a film, and you can watch a movie and go, why is it boring for the last 20 minutes? Well, those were the 20 pages they had to stick in to make it reach 90 minutes. When you're writing a novel, it's just all about the story and where the story's going. If anything, you end up with something that's too long and you have to start culling it back. The narrative is very, very similar, because you still want to have, in a film, you've got a 3-act structure. In a story,
Right.
I still think you want to have a 3-act or at least a 5-act structure, perhaps. You want to have inciting incidents. You want to have a drama. You want to have a pivotal turning point. You want to have character progression. You want to have a moment where it all comes together. You want to have that dramatic climax at the end of the 2nd act. You want to have one at the end of the 3rd act, or the you know, the 4th act if it's a novel, before you end up with, you know, the resolution. So in terms of structuring a story, it's the same. You have less time to do it for a film than you do for a book.
Okay.
In a book, you can be more lengthy in terms of the world building and the character development. In a film, you have to do it relatively quickly. You got to find those shorthand moments that make people understand, oh, this character, he's a well-known, or he's a famous spy that does all these amazing things, and no one's caught him yet, right? You can establish that very quickly with one quick scene. In a book, you want to stretch that out. You want to talk about some of those things, how they got to that point, and so forth, right? So if anything, it's in terms of the brevity of words versus the longevity of scenes and so forth between the two. But otherwise, it's very similar. Obviously, the format's different, you know, writing scenes and writing dialogue. But otherwise, the narrative structure is still very, very similar.
Interesting. And that kind of leads into my next question, which is, now you've won a lot of awards for your various screenplays. And in those awards, and also I should say, going back, the whole process of writing a screenplay and then pitching to the contest, and possibly someone who wants to maybe adapt a screenplay into a film, do you kind of have like a promise you're making to the person who is reading this? And if so, has that promise been honored and validated? Because as you have said, you know, it's all about marketing, advertising. You want to sell it. So has that promise been validated in your experience?
I like to think so. Look, I think, you know, I think all readers of fiction are looking for escapism, right? Escapism, I think, is one of the biggest draw cards for readers of fiction. What they're looking for is an alternative to the world in which we live. Now, whether that's somebody who likes romance novels because they like fulfilling the needs of an old soul, right, that they might not experience in the dull trauma of an everyday relationship. It could be somebody who likes the espionage thriller because we see politics and we hear about war, but it's all very mundane and very simple. But behind the scenes, there must be stuff. We want to explore that. It could be people who like the fantasy adventure because they want to explore a whole new world that's not necessarily better than this one, but is entirely different and interesting. I think everything you're doing in terms of a reader of fiction, it's about escapism, right? Even things like the lake house with the letterbox that sends letters through time, right?
Oh,
it's
yes,
action,
yes,
and it's
movie,
beautiful, and it's not dramatic or anything, but it's about the love of romance and holding that up to this it transcends time kind of ideal, rather than we have to be here together right now meeting in a club. So it's all about escapism. So if anything, that's the promise that I'm making to my readers, that they be able to immerse themselves in an escape of some sort and be surprised along the way. I love good stories that have a twist and a turn, that make up those inciting incidents, those dramatic plot points. And that's what I like about writing short films and short stories, because you're only giving people 5 to 10 minutes of escapism with a really good twist they didn't see coming. In longer format, make sure those twists are in there. And when I wrote my debut novel, Dark, I was reading it to my daughter, like chapter by chapter, as bedtime stories. And I knew that it was working when there were 2 moments that I'd finish reading a chapter and I would go to tuck her in at night, and she's crying. She's in tears. I made my daughter cry. Now, it's not a proud thing. She had such a visceral reaction to moments in the story that I wanted to have that reaction in my reader, right? When she's crying, it means that I made her fall in love with this character so much that when something bad happened, she felt it. And that's when you know you're onto something. You're giving them that promise of you'll be able to immerse yourself in this world and believe what's going on, suspending disbelief, and have a rollicking good time that escapes with those twists and turns and so forth, right? That's what I'm promising, and I'm sure it's working. Like I said, short films, you want to get in, you want to get out. All my short films always have some twist at the end. It's always a twist. My short stories do. I think you'll ask a bit later probably about favorite authors and so forth. But yeah, I think stories that have a twist, you didn't see coming, kind of smacks you in the head and you go, whoa, the last 10 pages, I thought this was going somewhere else, but now you really got me.
Yeah, it's actually like cool that you actually brought that up, because for me, when I first delved into short stories, I've never done short stories. I've always done like full-length novels. And for me, that was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. The 2 short stories that I am very proud of are The Assassin and Hellhounds. But if I had to go narrow that down, Hellhounds is my favorite because it's not alternate history, but it's like horror history. And it follows, and it kind of reads just like a horror film. It follows the battle of Belleau Woods between the German forces and the Marines in 1917, and how I have this tagline where it's like, we know in history that the Marines beat the German forces at Belleau Woods. What they don't tell you is how. And it reads just like a film. And the twist is, and I don't mind spoiling this because I love talking about it, is the twist is the Marines are werewolves, or to the Germans, Hollenhundes, hellhounds. And that correlates to the real life history of the Marine Corps, because that's how they got their name, hellhounds, devil dogs. That's how he got the Marine Corps mascot. And it's just from this battle that I kind of elevated with a little bit of horror. And I absolutely loved it so much. I'm actually now developing into a full-length story. And also, guys, you said, yeah, thank you. When it comes to like, espionage and real life politics, we always want to see, what's behind the scenes. The Assassin follows one character name that I created, Vincent Wolf, who is the son of 2 Army officers, both retired, lives in New York, has a perfect life. He's in West Point. The thing is, he is a former child soldier of the Hashashins, the real-life assassin order, which in our history fell to the Mongols during the medieval period. But in this story, they still exist. They've just been hidden. And it's all about his past coming to him. And for listeners who are hearing this now, that kind of reminds you of a lot of other films that we've seen in the past. And that actually leads into a tangent question is, when writing screenplays for like advertising and marketing for like a specific genre or theme, how do you make sure your story or screenplay is unique, it's different, it takes the theme and flips it on its head, but yet it's not so far out there that it kind of is foreign or alien?
I guess like what you did with Hellhounds is the inspiration comes from the world around us, right? We're all inspired, and it's the same with advertising. Within the industry, you'll see people going, "Oh, that's just ripping off this photo from 1945." No, it's inspired by. It's not ripping it off. It's inspired by, unless you're just duplicating it and not even having a nod to the fact that this is a pre-existing kind of creative work.
Right.
But you're always inspired by stuff. And part of the storytelling process can be inspired by those moments in history where you go, we don't know what happened in that gap, so I will write in that gap, and I can take it wherever I want. Depending on the genre I want to write. There's a lot more flexibility, obviously, in that sense than there is in advertising.
Right.
In advertising, you are creating a story that has to make somebody want to buy a product or a service at the end of the day. And then there becomes the problem is clients don't want to buy a story. They just want you to say, buy my product, buy my thing.
Right.
And so the stories are falling by the wayside. In terms of writing stories for film or for books, yeah, it's the inspiration of where it comes from. You might have a spark of an idea. My phone is full of notes of sometimes it's just one line of what if this happened, or it might just be a scene description. I've got one where it's a scene of a car just stops at the bottom of a hill, and the driver gets out and climbs all the way up to the top of this hill. And he gets to the top, he just shouts this massive and just that. So it's quite a visceral moment. But then I go, that sits somewhere one day. I don't know why he's so upset, why he needed to run up that hill with such effort to just shout at the world. If anything, that seems like a really good starting point to then go 24 hours earlier, this is what happened to make him so angry. But you have these things like little lightning flashes that just pop in. What I have been doing recently is going through those notes and going, that's a short story, that's a short story, that's a short film, that's a bigger idea. And then particularly because I have Dark ready to go, and I've started fleshing out the narrative of another book series called The Fifth Faction.
Ooh, okay.
Those short stories are really less labor intensive to get out that creative need to have something and complete it and go, there's a good story. And then I can put that. I put all my short stories on Vocal Media. We'll share the links at the end of this, but that's where I put my short stories at the moment. There's one there called Virtuoso, all about a violin player.
Okay.
Meet somebody who knows something about her past, and I don't want to give away. I don't want to do the spoilers. So somebody discovers something about her past that's again reveals a mystery that she has to overcome. I've got one in there. It's a really short one called Neophobic, set in a dystopian future where there's some kind of viral disease that turns humans into monsters.
Okay.
So people are on the hiding out from them kind of thing to try and survive. Again, won't reveal the plot twist in that one. And what was the other one I just published yesterday? It'll come back to me. I don't want to flick off the screen in case it ruins your video. But yeah, it's those sparks of an idea that you can see how it can flesh out into a story and where that twist is. Sometimes it is the twist. That's those what if moments. What if this was an ending? Let's lead people into that, but let's not make them realize we're leading them into that. We'll write a story where they think we're turning left, and right at the last minute we turn right, without destroying it. You don't want your reader to go, what? Why would that happen? You want them to kind of get to the end and go, of course, all the clues were there all along.
Wow, that's actually, all this is like really, really great advice, which I love. This is actually super, super cool. And since you mentioned all the stories or the notes, you said that, as you said, this is a short story, this is a novel, this is a screenplay. This kind of leads into my next question is, when you're developing these notes into these different forms, and you bring them out to the world, do you write these for yourself because obviously you enjoy them, but do you also write for an audience in mind? And some, I guess, have been either or. Sometimes they want to write for themselves because this is the type of stories that they enjoy. Other guests had said, no, we like to write for an audience in mind or for other types of readers or a particular group of readers. Let's say fantasy fiction, historical fiction, thriller, because this is a genre that works for them. So what about you, Matt? Are you writing, in a sense, for yourself because these are stories you like, or are you for an audience in mind because of that marketability and advertising mentality?
So my belief is, and it's almost my motto, stories are made to be told. There's no point of having a story if it's not being told. And if it's being told, it means there's somebody who's hearing it. So I'm writing for an audience. It's probably, yes, influenced also by my advertising career. Is it marketable? It's only marketable if there's people who want to be able to read it. I understand the sentiment, and I totally get the sentiment of write for yourself. And my stories are absolutely stories that I would seek out and read for myself. So I'm writing the stories that I want to write. So in a sense, I am writing for myself, but I'm absolutely thinking about the needs of the audience. What motivates them to read? What would make them want to read this particular story? And that's how you get, your stories want to get read. That's why I write, because I want to be read as well, right? I don't just write for writing's sake. Otherwise, I will die and somebody will come through my house and find volumes and volumes and volumes of memories. I had no idea he was doing all this stuff. That might be good for some people in like a psychological cathartic sense. But for me, I write because stories need to be told. They need an audience who want them told, read to them, told to them. They want to read it themselves. There needs to be somebody who's in, taking it in, imbibing this story, absorbing it all.
Right. And this kind of leads into a tangent question. And I had another one of my guests. She's actually the owner of her own publishing house, and she actually provided a lot of great advice on this question. Maybe you can provide your own insight into this, which is publishing for the trend or the hot topic genre or types of stories. Now, from what she said that is a danger because it's a trend, and trends tend to fade away, like in advertising. A product may be good 1 week, and next minute something else could replace it. And as you said, marketability is important because you do want your book to be known. But do you think there is a danger for new authors or new screenplay writers of, writing for a trend that may not last as long?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even in advertising, we have this thing, we call it, you need to be timeless and timely. So you need something that hits the market at the right moment because it increases relevance and salience and people's attention to it. But you also want it to be timeless. You don't want it to just be focused on that one moment in time and then it's fleeting. It's too ephemeral. It needs to last. It needs to have longevity. I think particularly with, well, it's the same, I guess, with film production, but particularly with publishing, it's such a long, slow process.
Yes, that is true.
There's a trend right now. By the time you get yours on the shelf, the trend has passed. I once saw an amazing seminar, like a TED Talk style session from, I can't remember his name. He's one of the senior people at Vice Media. And this guy was on fire. He talked. It was an amazing talk. But he was talking about the way that Vice approaches things is if you're trying to follow a trend, you're too slow. You need to create a trend. And we've seen that in the past with like Stephanie Meyer and so forth, right? There used to be no such thing as vampire literature or that kind of whole kind of space until we had her books come out, and then suddenly there's a new thing.
Right.
Again, I think J.K. Rowling at least created a new resurgent interest in fantasy fiction, but what she really nailed was fantasy fiction for a young audience and how they could immerse themselves in, again, an escapism world that has parallels to what they're experiencing in their real life. And if anything, it's not necessarily, she may have started a trend, but what she capitalized on was a universal truth, something that was timeless. There will always be an audience who takes stock of the current situation they're in, whether they're a kid at school or a retiree facing, the end of their life. They'll always have that as their world and go, I'd like to explore something different from this. And a book or a film can do that. So I think it's being very timeless, but you can take nuances of timeliness from what people experience and just know that this is an experience that's going to happen over and over and over again. But yeah, trying to latch onto a trend can be dangerous. And look, the publishers and the producers know this. They know
Mhm.
full well that if there's now 3 bestsellers on the New York Times list that are all, vampire literature, we're not going to chase that, because by the time we find a new one, that'll be over. They want to create the new trend. So write something that you know is great, that an audience would want, that your publisher or your lit agent can look at and go, oh, I think you've got something here. This could be a whole new thing that sparks.
That's actually, it's funny. You actually gave the very similar answer that a previous guest of mine had. Somebody you may know, P.L. Riven. I actually had her on the show a few days ago. I think it was like last week or 2 weeks ago. She actually gave the exact same answer, which is write for a trend that's coming up or start the trend. And I think that's so true. And it kind of leads into like a mixing of both, where you're writing for yourself, but you're also writing for an audience in mind, or a future audience, where you can start something new, which I think is really, really important. But I also think takes a lot of skill, dedication, timing, and above all, patience.
Yeah. Yes. Love PL Riven. If she's listening to this when it goes live, hey PL. I'm currently beta reading her debut manuscript as well for her. It's very exciting.
Oh, you're the person that you mentioned that someone was beta reading her book. It's like, oh, so now I know it's you.
she had, I believe she has a couple of people beta reading. I'm one of them. I'm not far from finishing it. It's exciting. It's good. She's on the path. So yeah, when this book comes out, people should get it. They should read it. But at the same time, she owes me a favor now. So when mine's ready to go, she's going to be beta reading mine.
I love it. I love it. And on the topic of books, and you actually brought this question up early, what book or what author has been the biggest source of inspiration for your style of writing? Because as you've said, we're always influenced by and inspired by everything around us. So who has inspired you throughout your writing?
It's a tricky question because, like I said, there's inspiration all over the place. My all-time favorite author has always been Terry Pratchett. And when I say that, there's plenty of people say, "Oh, you like Pratchett? Yeah, he's great. You should also read so and so because they're just like Pratchett." I've tried reading the other so and so's who are like Pratchett, and I've not found anyone nearly as entertaining as Pratchett was.
Okay.
His combination of world building in fantasy with adventure, with comedy, and with an underlying moral lesson in every book, for the real, it's unsurpassed. For me, he was the genius writer. I met him twice. I've got a first edition copy of every single one of his books. He nailed it for me. He probably takes into a comedic space further than I do in my own writing. I like dropping in every now and then those things where you'll get a smile. You make your audience go, "Huh, I see what you did there." But it's the rollicking adventures and so forth. Look, in terms of short stories and so forth, I mean, Stephen King, again, I'm dropping cliched names, right? Everyone knows Stephen King for his classic horror novels and his movies, his films, but his short stories, I've read some of his novels, but his short stories, he's done a couple of anthologies. I read Skeleton Crew and Night Shift, both got like 20, 25 short stories of his, and in there, it's exceptional stuff. Now, I know what he's done. He's had ideas, like I do, notes. You go, that'll never make a book, that'll never make a film, I'll turn to a short story. But in a lot of that stuff, it's the twists. It's also establishing here's a whole different thing you hadn't thought of as an environment or a character or a space or an incident and so forth. And now I'm going to take it somewhere even different. I think in that sense, I'd probably lean towards those two as like role model authors. Terry Pratchett for that world building and just being so immersive, and Stephen King for just get in, get out, where the twist that you go, whoa. I mean, my favorite story of Stephen King's of all time is called Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. I think it's in Night Shift. I could be wrong. It's incredible. It's about a wealthy woman who moves into this country house, but she still has to commute to the city in her big Mercedes Benz or something. And she wants to get there shorter, like faster and faster each time. And even his description of you take a map and you just fold the map over and then you can get from A to B shorter. She managed to do that in her car, right? Until she disappears one day because she's clearly folded the map too many times and gone into a parallel universe or something. But yeah, when it gets to that final part, you just kind of go, that's so cool. That's so cool. Probably the other inspiration would be Bill Bryson, who doesn't write fiction. He writes, obviously, non-fiction, but he always unpacks, whether it be, he unpacked all the works of Shakespeare. He did Short History of Nearly Everything, which is one of my favorite books of all time, which describes everything in the universe from the Big Bang through to where we are today. And he does it all in one book. Describes how science started, what science has learned, what we know about the universe, and so forth. But he has a very clever way of writing things essentially 3 times. He'll go, here's the science of it. Now I'll give you a more layman's term version of that so you can understand it. But now I'll also just give a metaphor. I'll give something you go, imagine this was grains of salt thrown over a black tablecloth. That's how many stars there are in the night sky, right? And so by the time you've read it, you understand every single complex thing he's talking about, from, like I said, the Big Bang to the end of the dinosaurs to string theory to the invention of chemistry. You understand it all. I find that inspiring because I love the science of things. I'm a geek at heart. I love the history of things. And if anything, it's that ability to take a complex idea and explain it in a simple way. I try to weave that in as well. So even my novel, Dark, The Boy in the Hole, it's a fantasy world, but I borrow from the real world, from history, things that we know, right? We all know the story of the Trojan horse. So I borrow from that and drop that in there without it being necessarily an incident within the story, but allow that to drop in there under a new name because it's shorthand. I no longer have to explain what happened when a wooden figure rolls up to a castle gate. People know what that story is.
Right.
Borrow from the real world. You can drop it in as shorthand, and it helps build out your world faster and more immersively, I think. So, those are kind of the role model things for me.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely have to agree. And for me, I've always been a big fascinator of history, especially now. Alan Smale, Colin Ingleton, Bernard, Cornwell Cromwell. I always butcher or mess up his last name. Valerio Manfredi have been, for me, like the titans of historical fiction. And then for fantasy, Brian Jacques' Redwall. That's actually the one series that I grew up reading. Whenever I tell people about Redwall, it's like the kid version of Game of Thrones, because don't get attached to these characters because they're probably going to die. And the world building of Brian Jacques' stories are just so fascinating. And I found out the reason why those stories were so good is because they were actually made for young children and a blind hospital. And that's why they were very descriptive in everything, from the architecture, the food. That's always what sold me. The food and just the scenery. And definitely also for me, I love epics. I love historical epics. I love movies. So a lot of my stories, characters, and battles are heavily movie based. Like I will sometimes listen to the battle scenes, not even watch the video. I'll just listen to it and imagine the characters that I've created doing the actions of the sounds that I'm hearing. And as you said, there's a lot of inspiration we take from the world, and it's fascinating. But it also kind of leads into another question, a little more serious question, which is...
I listen to movie soundtracks when I'm writing too.
Oh, nice.
Like I said, when I'm certainly, in terms of a novel, I'm writing it with the whole scene. I have the vision in my head of how this thing would play out if it was a film. And so when you've got that kind of music playing and you have, I have a playlist, I have a go-to playlist, there's stuff in there that sometimes you go, oh, I need to write a battle scene, so I'm going to put on this. And as I'm going through, I'm going to close my eyes and go, yeah, this happens. And you're right. I want to, it's immersive, but creating the visual, right? How do you create that visual scenes inside the reader's head so they know exactly how it looks, and that puts them in that place? So I do the same thing.
Nice. And it actually kind of leads into the question, what I think is a very important question to ask, which is, for for everyone who's like either writer, screenwriter, or in advertising or in any sort of work where you're writing, you put a lot of heart into it, no matter how long you do it, or if you're passionate about this project or not, it still takes a lot of time and effort. And sometimes as authors or creative writers, we have burnout days. We have days we don't want to write all. I think on some days you don't want to write, period. They says, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. So for you, Matt, in your career at this point now in your life, what pushes you to still write? What is your why?
My why? Oh, what's my why? I guess, like I said, stories are made to be told. Most people can have an idea for an interesting story, even if they're not a creative person. They'll have an idea going, oh, wouldn't it be great to see a movie that did this, right? They can have an idea, but if you've got the ability or the skill or the talent to be able to write it compellingly, then it needs to be written. I only wish that I had decided on that as a life role a long time ago. Then I wouldn't have all these notes. I would have all of these stories already done. That's the why for me, because I'm bursting with all these ideas, with all of these concepts, and they're not all great. I know they're not. That's why a lot of them still sit as notes. But when you go through them and you order them in terms of priority, going, no, there's definitely more in that, and this is a story that can be told. This can make someone's day, right? The short stories that I'm putting on Vocal Media, I hope that somebody's just flicking through and they find a story and they can spend sometimes only 5-6 minutes reading it and come away going, oh, that was cool. That was really cool. If it just gives them a little moment, right? A little spark of joy or something. That's the motivation. I want people to read these stories because there's an idea there that's unique and it's different and it can entertain.
Nice. And it kind of leads into another question. This is actually a question I asked PL about. It's actually one of my favorite questions to ask is, context for this question. So I was at a seminar years ago hosted by an author, and she explained these 3 things, which I've always kept and I've always liked asking fellow writers and authors, which is writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves. And she broke it down. She said, we're liars because we make stuff up. We are cheaters because we cheat people out of time. And we are thieves because we always steal from each other because the same story has been written numerous times. What is your thoughts on those 3 things? Do you agree or do you disagree?
And who said this? Is PL said this?
Oh no, PL had her own comments about this. She was like, I am against this from the start. But what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a fun way to look at things. I don't necessarily agree with it entirely, but I think it's a fun way to look at things. Look, in terms of lying, I don't think we're lying because we're making stuff up. I think we're lying to trick, and this is part of the cheating. We're lying to trick people into believing one thing so we can hit them with the other side on the next page, right? That's a trick, right? I think that's kind of essential to stuff. And you not your big Marvel blockbusters, but all your best films have that little thing where they distract you with the left hand, then slap you with the right. Right? that's a lie and a cheat in its own way. The thievery thing. Look, was it Andy Warhol or somebody said that we're all thieves? One famous artist said it because he acknowledged the fact that we are all inspired by everything else. An idea that one person had inspired 10 others, inspired 10 others, and it's just a big family tree of inspiration. And we shouldn't delve too hard into the fact of, oh, you've just ripped off this. It's like, no. I saw that and I thought it was good, but I had this other idea that I think is expanding upon that or takes it in a different direction, or is bigger or better or whatever, or I flipped it and went, what if it was this instead, right? That's okay, right? It's all inspiration to just help fill this massive need, this void for content and inspiring people with different things. So look, I like the concept of it. I think you probably got to think a little more psychologically about it than just with thieves and liars and cheats.
Yeah, and I love asking this question because it does make some people think. But you and Pia are probably the first 2 that have actively said we do not agree with this. So thank you for providing the other side. And there was actually a book I actually want to use an example of that says like it's a blending of the inspirations. Have you heard of the book of Dinosaur Nights?
No.
Think Game of Thrones and Jurassic Park coming together, having a love child, and that's Dinosaur Nights. In fact, George R. R. Martin gave it his seal of approval on the back of the first book because I have, unfortunately, there's only 3 books. The author did pass away a few years ago, but those 3 books, it reads like Game of Thrones because you have these medieval knights, but they're riding dinosaurs. Horses still exist in this world, but they're dinosaurs. Like you have the Triceratops, which are the tanks. You have the Allosaurus, which belong to the Ranger class. And then, of course, you have the T-Rex, which are solely for the elite, the royals, because they're the alphas. Surprisingly, no pterodactyls, no aquatic reptiles. But then again, that would be too overpowered. But then again, that could have been a note that the author may have had that never got to it, which these notes always lead into different stories, as you mentioned.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And leading into like another fun little question. So you mentioned that you are part of a beta reader group for a PL. You're one of many who are reading her stories. Now, for you yourself, are you a part of any writing group, or were you a part of a writing group in the past?
I'm not a part of a writing group. I did join a couple of the online writing groups. You'd sit online, you'd do the calls. I wasn't getting a lot of takeout from it. I wasn't getting a lot of value out of it. And that's not to say they're not great. I think if anything, it's the experience that I'd had already in 25 years of advertising, and it's a totally different ball game. But that in itself was my own writing group, because as you're coming up with ideas and getting people to bounce it back or shut them down or whatever, it's forcing you to explore further and push things further. And so it's now just an innate kind of ability for me to challenge my own ideas and push them slightly further forward and so forth. I haven't found writing groups to be overly valuable for me per se, but that's just me. I know that a lot of people get a lot of worth out of them.
Yeah, and it actually kind of leads into, again, calling back to PL, because she had a lot of great things, which is writing groups are important, but if you're going to use them to be writing professionals, in a sense, if you're a writer who's a hobbyist and like this is just for something that's for fun, then, writing groups can be good. But if you're a writing professional, you want to be a part of a writing circle where you're actually going to, give constructive criticism and build the other person up to help them build their stories and their brand, which I think from listening to PL about that, it is really true. A lot of people probably are writers at heart, but to be a writer professional, that takes a lot of dedication. You got to set time to like write, even if it's like an hour a day, which I've been now doing. I've been writing now an hour a day, and I found it super beneficial. And I think it's important. So in your opinion, would you say a writing group is important if you are transitioning from the hobbyist to the professional?
I think it certainly could be, because it helps you understand how the whole industry works. I think it can help you start to explore and unpack your own abilities to some degree, right? Because you're hearing from others and going, oh, I never even thought of that, or, learning new techniques and all that sort of stuff. If you're doing it because you're looking for validation in your own skills, that's what is a problem. I think it's problematic, because you'll either get people saying, oh, this is great, and they might just be saying it because they don't want to hurt your feelings. Because let's face it, right? What you're writing is you're creating your ideas, your own babies, and you don't want other people to hurt them, right? You're protecting them,
right?
So and others know that, and so they'll go, oh, I think that's great, right? Because they want to share their idea, and they want you to shoot them down. So you might get these kind of these nods, of just yeah, that's great, keep going. You might get people who are the other end are going, no, and they might do it meaningfully of no, I think you need to do this and you need to do that, and you're the only person inside your own head.
Right.
And they might pick upon a certain part within your story or something like that, or an aspect. And you know, I know you're saying don't do that, but I know I need to do that because in 9 chapters time, that's going to be really, really important. Trust me on this, right? So you know your work better than anybody else knows your work. What you do need to do is get to the point, like PL and I, finish your manuscript, then let people read the entire thing rather than in a writing group going, here's what I'm talking about today, this one thing. Get somebody who's going to read the entire thing, then come back to you with really constructive notes of, I can see, I love the writing style. I can see what you're doing here. You're probably laboring these scenes a bit too much. And this character, maybe he just needs another inciting incident right here. And it's really easy to resolve. What you certainly want to do is go back to somebody and unpick the work they've done, right? At the end of the day, they're going to take that manuscript and they're going to take it to a lit agent. And you might think you're helping them by making the story different or improving it, but you're actually giving them your story, not their story. They need to work that out for themselves. They need to have their story and take it to a lit agent. And that's going to be the proof of whether or not it's going to get published or not, to be honest.
Definitely. And 100% agree, because I've learned this since I have been on Inkit, which is an online writing group, and I met a lot of authors on there, and yeah, 100% agree. It's always good to have the full thing finished, even if it's like the first draft, because that's another thing not a lot of people take in consideration. The story that you may have had on the outline may not be the same story down the road. It may have some elements of the original idea, but it may not be the same thing, and that is okay if it's not the same story. If it evolves over time, then that's good. Then it shows you are willing to change and listen to feedback.
As long as you're happy with the story now, right? If you're happy with the new iteration of the story, then great, because that's still your story. When I was writing Dark, I actually got to the end of the first draft and went, and I was still reading to my daughter going, there's just a hole here. There's a gap here that in the chronology of the events, it's not working, and I need something else at this point. And so my wife, who's a great support, she actually gave me the time. She sent me away on my own writer's retreat, just me on my own in a house down in the country. And I went into that house. I drove down there, went into that house, and the first thing I did was took all the pictures off the walls and took out a book of Post-it notes or sticky notes and wrote down every scene on those Post-it notes, just stuck them all up on the wall, and then looked at them and went, now I'm going to structure that into 5 acts. I'm going to make sure that each of those is building up to a massive explosive moment. And that's when I was going, this entire act here has got nothing. So do I write this entire act out, or do I completely change it? And it allowed me to get that entire 90,000 words, 400 pages, 350 pages, on just little Post-it notes. And there's about 70 of them, and stuck on a wall, and making sure I'm following a really good structure that's going to keep the reader enthralled. And that solved all the problems. That I came away from 48 hours of doing that and rewriting, came away going, I've nailed it. This is better than what I thought what I had was great, but this is even better.
Definitely 100% agree. We do have a last few minute questions before we go into the closing segment. So the one other question I wanted to ask you is, as you mentioned before, you are looking for a literacy agent. What are the things you're looking for in a literacy agent, to make sure you're actually going to get the full benefit of the publishing house? Because as I've learned through my experience, and I've gone through self-publishing through Barnes & Noble, a friend of mine went through Vanity Publishing, which that was a horrible experience. And, she was able to win back the custody of her book. I'm really happy for her. So for you, what are you really looking for in a publishing house of science that are genuine in an era where a lot of companies are just trying to just grab the new thing and just post it for their brand? I'm
looking for someone who believes in me, believes in the story. But if anything, it's vision, right? How do you? Because I think that the publishing system itself, the traditional publishing system, is so outdated. It's so stuck in methodologies that's had for the last 50 to 100 years. And that's why we now have self-publishing, which is still not there, right? It's great for people to publish a book and get it, but then there's all the marketing you got to do, and you might not quite hit the stratosphere. And once you've done that, a publisher's not going to touch that book at all. They might go, oh, that's interesting, but what else have you got? And we'll work on that. So it can help. I think the publishing system is so outdated that there's definitely space, and this is the advertising guy talking, the marketing experience talking, there's space for a traditional publisher, a lit agent and a publishing house to dominate the market by being disruptive in their model, to be more accessible, to be more productive. Look at how Netflix and Amazon and HBO are dominating our screens because they changed the industry. They went the old world, saw the old world industry and go, no, we can produce faster if we democratize this and open it up more, so there are more writers, there are more people with the ideas coming to us, and we can choose and increase the scale and the volume that we're producing, and it will work. And now, sure, you sit there and you're watching Netflix or Amazon, and there's a lot of content. You go, that's really ordinary, but what they did was build a house. Yeah, a house that people gravitate towards and seek out, and that's where they're making their money. And I think there could be a publishing house that does the same through lit agents and just looks for the stories. The outdated model of, oh, we've got a one-day window that we're open for your spec manuscripts. Come on, 1 day out of an entire year. What are you doing for the other 364? You can't tell me you're reading all that, right? You can work faster, more rapidly. Or even the ones where you go through, you find the sites of the lit agents, and they say, oh, we're looking for this. And then you go, right, that's great. And by the time you've written your query letter, you go back and it says, oh, we're no longer looking. And it's like, come on. It's pretty easy to go, I'm going to take a look at everything, all right? And then I'm going to decide this is the ones I'm going to pursue even further. And I'm not a lit agent, so I get it. They get inundated, right? There's thousands and thousands of people out there with ideas. But that's what I'm saying. Find a model, a disruptive model that makes it more accessible, and you'll uncover those gems that no one else is finding because they can't get through those ridiculous draconian barriers. So if anything, I'm looking for a lit agent who believes in me, but has a vision as well, that they go, I'm not just going to take on this because I think it's a book that can make me this margin. I'm taking this on because I can see the option rights for a film franchise and all of the action figures and the T-shirts and education models that end up being in schools, goddamn. They can see that and they go, that's millions of dollars right there, right? Nice. I'm not just selling a book. I'm selling an entire franchise of stuff off this one thing, and I can put all the effort into that, and it's going to work for everybody. I would love to find that. I'd love to find somebody who has a bigger vision than what's happening between those two the outer sheets of a book.
Nice. I may have someone for you on that, but I'll say that for the end of the session. My next question is, who have been your biggest supporters throughout your journey?
Look, my wife has been a good supporter. Like I said, she gives me space. The hard thing when you're writing is certainly when you have a career and you have a family, it's finding that space to go. And it's no good to go, I'll just go upstairs to the upstairs room and we'll be downstairs. What do you do? No, because you need, for me certainly, I have some neurodiversity. You might not be able to tell, but I have some neurodiversity, and I can't have people even remotely near my space when I'm trying to focus, right?
Okay.
It's almost fear of an interruption right now that somebody's going to walk through that door can get in the way of me having free thought. And so she has been great in going, this weekend, just go away. She'll book it, she'll pay for it, and I just get in the car and I go away on my own. So she's been great in that sense. My daughter is a huge supporter. It's probably weekly that she says, Daddy, has anybody bought your book yet? Right? She loves it. She wants it out there. She believes in me. And if anything, she's younger than the audience my book is written for, but that speaks volumes for me. And sure, she's my daughter. She loves everything I do. But the fact that she wants this out there, that she's proud of it, she wants to see it. So they're my biggest supporters. And my friends, you know, whenever we catch up over drinks or dinner, they're always asking, how's it going? You know, you got any leads yet? How's this going? I saw you writing this thing. How's that? Oh, tell us about that one. Which is the fact that they're interested shows that there's, you know, that I have this thing to share. And that's why my voice, again, people want to hear my stories. I want them to read my stories.
Nice. And This is a two-part question, and I'm so mad that I'm asking this now. What can you tell us about your debut novel? And I also read in your bio, from what you sent me, you're working on a Star Wars fan film, which that really made me happy because I'm an also avid Star Wars fan. I'm actually writing my own. It's a Star Wars fan novel, but I do want to hopefully adapt it into a story under the Star Wars Lucas brand for Del Rey Books. So what can you tell us about those two projects they're working on?
So the book, first and foremost, Dark and the Boy in the Hole. It's fantasy fiction. Think, kings, dragons, all that sort of stuff, right? So old world fantasy fiction, classic fantasy fiction. What I'm doing, though, is I'm creating the anti-hero. I'm taking if you will, again, taking Harry Potter and flipping it upside down, right? Where everything was nice. No. I think, if anything, the biggest evil on the planet is humanity. Let humanity be the bad guy. And so in mine, it's this mysterious anonymous boy with no name who's been imprisoned in a pit of the king's dungeon his entire life. And when he is finally extricated from this pit, he meets and sides with the last few remaining remnants of the monsters of the old world that humanity has hunted to the brink of extinction. And he sides with them, and they discover he has an ability to mimic anything he sees. And he then leads them in an uprising against humanity's greed, against wars, against all the nastiness that humanity does, because the monsters at the end of the day are better than what we are. And so that's what that's about. That's the one that I'm shopping around at the moment. So again, if there's lit agents out there, middle grade through to potentially young adult, but it's middle grades primarily. That's what I'm shopping at the moment. I'm starting, as I said, I've started working out the story structure. I haven't actually started writing the story yet for Fifth Faction, which is kind of based on, I should say, Dark himself being this child, this outsider. Is again based on my own neurodiversity of never feeling like I fit in anywhere. So he's between these two worlds. Fifth Faction, kind of based loosely on your experience as a kid going through high school. And there are those who are good at math, and those who are good at sport, and those who are really good at English and science and so forth. And so I've taken those, and they become the factions that for 2,000 years have been secret societies of the best scientists, the best mathematicians, the best sports people who are at war with each other in this secret domination. And kids, when they hit their 16th birthday, get pretty much abducted because you're an amazing kid in science and chemistry. We're abducting you on your 16th birthday, and you're now joining this faction to go to war against these others. And it focuses on a group of kids who all happen to be really good, obviously, who end up being on opposite sides of this war. So they're the two that I'm looking at. So Fifth Faction is contemporary urban fantasy. It's got a touch of steampunk in it. So that's where I'm writing in terms of novels. Yes, the films are in all sorts of genres. Horror, thriller, comedy. I've got some rom-com. The Star Wars fan film. I really wanted it to come out 2 days ago on the 4th of May. May the 4th, Star Wars Day, was when I wanted it to launch, but I haven't. It was a slower process than I'd hoped. And basically, what I've done is I've made an entire, so far it's about 11 minutes long, this short film, using all found footage. I haven't shot a single thing. It's all found footage from the Star Wars universe. And I don't mean from the actual Lucasfilms universe, from all the Star Wars fans. The people who are creating their own scenes and their own characters.
Okay.
Renders of various creatures and of the spaceships and so forth. And so I've gone through and found all of that and used all that to create this entire story. It's offbeat because it is a comedy that centers on two stormtroopers who are given a mission, and they take it on to try and redeem themselves. As a Star Wars fan, do you remember in the first film, when C-3PO and R2-D2 are in the control room and the other down in the trash compactor, and then when it all comes, the stormtroopers come running in to basically arrest C-3PO and R2-D2, and as the door opens, one of the stormtroopers hits his head.
Yeah, he hits his head.
That's the character I've got, right?
Oh, nice.
The laughing stock of all the stormtroopers, and so he puts his hand up for this mission to redeem himself. along with somebody else who also. So I borrowed all from there's lots of Easter eggs from the Star Wars canon in it for people to go, oh yeah, that's why that's this and that's it. But yeah, it's not what you think. It is offbeat, and I'm down to the final edit, and then I'm going to get the voice acting in there for the 2 stormtroopers, and then I'm going to be running the whole thing through AI to give it an animated look.
Nice. Yeah, when I saw that you were working on it, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Because the Star Wars story that I've been working on is actually based off a character of mine that I wrote in college. I was actually part of a theater group which was Star Wars themed. It was called Society of Lightsaber Duelists, or SOLD. And the character I had to create was he was a Mandalorian Jedi, and his whole backstory is that he is born after the events of Naboo, but before the events of the Clone Wars. And I fleshed out this whole lore and backstory about him, that he's tied to the first Mandalorian Jedi, which is now the current lore. He has this relationship with a fellow Mandalorian, which is something a Jedi cannot have. And he's very outspoken because of, being a Mandalorian. He sees things from a different perspective. And it's just so interesting. And that, I think, allows a lot of creativity in Star Wars because, yes, it's the brand, it's the whole image, but allows creativity to flow. And that's the beautiful thing about Star Wars. So for any property, it allows for creativity to shine and take something and turn it on its head, or provide a different perspective or a certain point of view from the Star Wars lore.
Yeah.
Nice. So the last 2 questions I want to ask you before we get into the closing segment, but they're probably the 2 most important ones, is first one is, have you ever had a sense of validation, a sense when you began this path as a screenplay writer as well as an author, have you had that sense of validation from your fellow peers, your fellow screenwriters who have seen your work and says, this work is awesome? And I know you've given a lot of great advice throughout this episode, which thank you for that. Is there any other advice you would give to aspiring authors and aspiring screenwriters?
Certainly getting validation from those who are in the space is great. Like I said, it's getting validation from what your would-be audience, I think, is even better. If you've got this proof that there's going to be a reader, there's going to be a buyer, then you're closer to actually getting a deal. The validation is always great. It's just again, it's not about the ego. It's about just the comfortability that I know I can do this. That I'm not living my own fantasy. It's not a pipe dream, and I have no ability after all. And I've read books and published and self-published books where you go, this is just awful. How did this get through? Or even self-published, you go, oh mate, it really needed to have another read and get some feedback. So in that aspect, getting feedback, I think, is quite key. People are very afraid to share their completed work because they're afraid that it's going to get stolen. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the risk. It's just what happens in any of these creative pursuits. Sharing a work before it's actually out live in the world is a risk, but it's a risk you have to take because you need to get input to improve upon it, or validation, or even somebody saying, I love that. I'm going to get that to the next level for you. I'm going to publish that or make that film or whatever. You're not going to get anything stolen if you don't show it to anybody, but you're also not going to get anything published and produced if you don't show it to anybody.
That is some of the best. Everything you've said throughout this whole episode has had a lot of very powerful and very, very important advice. And I think you nailed it on the head with those last 2 things.
Thank you.
And I think this is a perfect way to end this wonderful, wonderful interview. So, Matt, before we close out on this incredible interview, where can people find and engage with you and see your current works as well as upcoming projects in the making?
First and foremost, I would say my writing website, my author's website, which covers off my main book projects, Dark, Fifth Faction, and another one I've got up there. That's M.A.Batten.com, M.A.Batten.com. That also has links through to my other sites. So my Instagram, which is Mr.Chicken_films. Follow me. I'm after followers because it's a baked-in audience. That'd be great. And also, at the end of the day, people don't realize it yet, but those who are following me, they're going to get offers. There's going to be an opportunity of today only. Here's a signed copy, or I've actually I've printed a T-shirt and only 20 copies, and only for Instagram followers to get. So there's going to be that kind of thing that as I go into marketing, right? So follow me on Instagram, Mr.Chicken_films. And lastly, check out, if you want to see my short films and find out what I'm writing about in terms of screenplays, then MrChickenFilms.com. But yeah, go to M.A.Batten.com, and within there you'll see the about page, and it has links to my other sites.
Awesome. Well, listeners and viewers, this concludes another great author interview. I want to thank our guest, Matt, for joining us and providing all of his insight and sharing his work and sharing his passion with all of us. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. You've been an amazing guest.
Thank you, Gabrielle. It's been great. I love doing this sort of stuff. You know, I get to talk about myself. You're talking about my passion, but at the same time, I'm hearing about you, hearing about your stories, and hopefully your listeners are getting something out of this, right? If I can make somebody who's sitting on a manuscript go, you know what, I've got to do this, I'll be happy. I'll be happy if somebody does at me and go, you know what, I'm going off and finish my manuscript because of what you said. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear that sort of stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I 100% agree. Comment down below, what was your favorite piece of advice Matt provided in this interview? Make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure to check out The Gathering, my debut novel on Barnes & Noble. I'll provide that in the section below, along with Matt's email, so you can check out his work as well as his other handles. This has been The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill, signing out, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.